Evanston Public Library presents Mystery Science Kits. Please keep your kit sealed until you receive further instructions.
Dear Josh, hi, my name is Sky. I'm 11 years old and I live in Evanston. We haven't met in person, but I loved watching the Peregrine Falcon banding that you helped with at the library last spring. It was so cool. I love the falcon so much. It seems like you know a lot about animals and nature, so I was wondering if you could help me figure something out. My friend and I were hiking in the woods recently, and I saw some mysterious objects falling out of a tree. We looked for what could have dropped them, but we didn't see or hear anything that could have been a clue. The objects are brownish with some stuff mixed in, but they don't seem like a part of a tree. They almost look like clumps of dirt, but why would dirt fall out of a tree? They almost remind me of something I saw on YouTube, where these beetles rolled poop into balls. I think they're called dung beetles, but I don't think we have any dung beetles around here. They kind of look like poop, but I know this is gross. They don't really smell like poop. I decided to take some of these things home. I'm going to keep a couple, but I'm going to send a couple to you in case you have time to look at them and help us figure out what they are. I hope you can help me because I'm super curious about them. Would you be able to help us, please? Thanks for your time. Sincerely, Sky.
Guess what? Sky put one of the mysterious objects into a bag for you to study. At this time, you may open the bag. Take the plate or bowl out of your bag and set it on the table. Then, find the small foil-wrapped object. Take it out of the bag and unwrap it. This is the mysterious object. It's been heat sanitized and is completely safe to touch. Take a careful look at it without breaking it. What do you notice about it? The color, the texture, the weight? What could you do to figure out what it is and where it came from? Press pause on the video now until you're finished with your observations. Do you have any idea of what it could be?
Dear Sky, sure, I'd be glad to help. I received your package and can help you identify your mystery objects. Let's meet on Zoom and we can talk all about it. Sincerely, Josh Engel from Red Hill Birding.
Ooh, I'm gonna join this Zoom meeting.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. These are owl pellets. They are sort of like poop, but not quite. These are from the waste of an owl. And what happens is an owl catches its prey, maybe a mouse, maybe a small bird, and when the animal is small, they just eat them whole. But they can't digest all of that stuff. So all of the meat gets digested, but all of the fur, feathers, bones, teeth, none of that gets digested. And it all gets compacted together in a part of their innards called the gizzard. It gets all compacted together, and then they throw it up. And this is what you're left with. This is an owl pellet, and it's full of all of that undigested material. And we can actually open it up, look inside, and try to figure out what the owl was eating, what its last meal was. So that's what we're going to do.
At this time, you have a choice. You can watch the whole video first to see Josh open some owl pellets and then open your owl pellet after you're done watching. Or you can open your owl pellet right along with Josh. Enjoy!
So they're very dry. which is good. They just sort of fall apart. And right now I'm just using my hands to do it initially. You might think that's a little bit gross, but really there's nothing in here that's going to hurt you. If you want to wear gloves, you can wear gloves. Probably a good idea to wash your hands when you're done, but there's really nothing in here that's going to cause you any harm or get you sick at all. So it's just falling apart, and I am seeing lots of little bone fragments in here. Now, in order to really identify what it was that the owl was eating, the best thing to find is the skull and the teeth. Those are going to be the most distinctive parts of any prey. So for example, if we find a bird in there, it's going to be very hard to know that it's a bird unless we find the skull, which has the beak attached. And if it's a mammal, which this probably is, it helps to find the teeth and the skull so that we can look at the shapes of the teeth, the shape of the skull, and try to figure out what the mammal was that it was eating. So,
At this time, you can pull out the papers from your kit and unfold them. You'll use the top paper, the bone chart, to help you figure out what kinds of animals your owl ate. The front side of the paper shows the bone shapes of 6 different kinds of animals that could be in your owl pellet. The back side of the paper shows the skeleton of a rodent, so you can see where all those bones belong.
So we have other tools that we can use as well. One good tool are tweezers that you can see here. Scientists call them forceps, and they're good at picking. So I'm going to be picking off some of the materials off the bones to try to isolate the bones themselves. So here we have a piece of a jaw of a little mammal. And we have lots of other bones here as well. Some bigger bones, lots of tiny bones, and there's so many bones in here that I'm not going to try to isolate them all. What I'm really going to do is look for jaws and teeth, and here's another one. And I'm just using my fingers and this forceps. We also have some other household tools here. You can use a fork to help pick through it. We have little paintbrushes that I can use to get off a little bit more of the dust and dirt, just so I can get a better view of the teeth. And these bones are pretty fragile, although they're also pretty strong. So you do want to be a little bit gentle, but you're unlikely to break it. Although sometimes you'll find that the teeth will just fall out because they've gotten loose. So we've got 2 jaw bones there, lots of other fragments. Just gonna look through all of this stuff, see if I can find more jaw bones, maybe pick out a couple other bigger bones that I find. Oops, and I just was talking about how they're strong and you can't break them, and I broke one. But that's gonna happen, that's okay. So typically an owl coughs up a pellet about once a day. Although if it's been eating a lot, maybe it'll do more than one. And of course, owls hunt at night, not during the day. So they go out hunting at night, they catch their prey, eat it, and then probably sometime during the day when they're asleep, hidden somewhere in a tree, is when they cough up the pellet. And a lot of times, especially in the winter, owls will sit in the exact same place every single day during the day. They find a good hiding place and they use it every day. And that's where you find a lot of owl pellets, is under those places. They're called roost sites, where they sleep during the day. And sometimes you can find dozens of pellets in a roost site. And sometimes owls even can be social and they'll spend time roosting with other owls. And if you have lots of owls coughing up a pellet every day, that's when you can get a real bounty of pellets.
Is it uncomfortable for owls to cast pellets?
Probably not. It's just a normal part of what they do. Apparently owls do not have any gag reflex, so it doesn't really feel like it does if you were to throw something up. It's just a normal part of what they do, and they probably hardly even notice it. Although, if you go onto YouTube and watch videos of it, it looks sort of uncomfortable. So now here I've got a pile of fur, little bones, bone fragments. I found another jawbone. You can see with using that brush, I'm making the teeth nice and clean there. I'll put that off to the side. So we've got a nice bunch of clean bones here, and then all the other stuff that we're not really going to worry too much about off to the side.
How many animals does an owl eat every night?
That's a good question. They can eat a lot if they're successful. I mean, I don't know exactly the number, but a pellet will often have the remains of 2 or 3 mice or prey items in it. This one, I can see at least 2 upper jaws here, so that's at least 2 animals. But if they could catch more, they probably would. And owls really, they like to hunt on nights that are quite still, that aren't too windy, where there's a good moon, gives them more light to hunt with. Although they have extraordinary hearing too, so they can also hunt by hearing. And there's actually some owls that can hunt in total darkness, or in at least not being able to see their prey. For example, some owls can hear rodents running underneath a layer of snow and can hunt those just by hearing them. And then there's an owl called a barn owl that can hunt in total darkness at night. And their ears are not, the owls that can hunt in total darkness, their ears are not even on their head, and it helps them triangulate, so narrow in on exactly where the prey is that they need to catch. So here we have a real nice skull. So you can see the orange teeth in the front. I think this talks about, so you have your bone identification sheet, and you can see that these orange teeth in the front are called the incisors. And then you can see the molars a little bit farther back. I'm just going to use the tweezers to clear off some of the junk from inside the eye socket. Then I'll use the brush to brush away some of the fur. And this is a very nice upper jaw of a rodent of some kind. And the teeth, the molar teeth, are the ones that you can use to identify it, and they are very distinctive on this one. So we'll just pick through, see if there's any other jawbones in here. Maybe we can see how many animals it ate before it coughed up this pellet. One reason that owls are such good hunters is because they fly totally silently. They have special modifications on some of their wing feathers that allows air to pass through. So if you ever are outside and you hear big birds flying, like a duck or a goose or a hawk, you'll actually hear its wings making noise, and that's the air passing around them. But an owl will be totally silent, and that's probably in part so they can sneak up on prey at night when there's very little other noise, so that the prey doesn't hear them. But it could also be to help the owls, because the owls are relying on at least partially on sound to hear where their prey is, and they don't want the sound of the air passing over their wings to interfere with their hearing.
If owls can't hear each other flying around, how do they hear each other and communicate?
Owls are very vocal birds, and they communicate primarily by sound. And because they're nocturnal and they're mostly out when there's very little light, owls are almost all brown. Almost every kind of owl in the world is some shade of brown because they don't need to do visual signaling. So unlike a cardinal that's bright red, or a robin that has an orange breast, or a goldfinch that's yellow, owls are out at night when there's so little light that being colorful would not help them very much. Here's another upper jaw. So now we know it ate at least 2 rodents. Here's a lower jaw that probably goes with one of those. But I said that almost all owls are brown, but only almost all owls. There's one very famous kind of owl that's not brown, and that's a snowy owl, which is mostly white, or black and white, some of them. And snowy owl, some people will know from the Harry Potter books, because Hedwig, Harry Potter's owl, was a snowy owl.
I wish there were snowy owls around here.
We do sometimes get snowy owls around here in winter. Snowy owls they don't mind very harsh climates and very cold weather, and they nest on the tundra, very far to the north. And for them, they come to Chicago and the Midwest to escape even harsher winters than what we have. So we do sometimes get snowy owls, and snowy owls are not owls of the forest. Owls, you might think of owls as living in the forest, but actually owls live in just about every habitat on Earth. Some owls live in the desert, some owls live in the prairie, and even snowy owls live on the tundra. And so when they come this far south, they like areas that are very open and that have very few trees and are the most like the tundra where they usually live. So around here, they like places like the Lake Michigan shoreline, where there's parks where it's open. They like airports, which are also very open habitats, and they like farmlands, which are also very open. So you don't find snowy owls usually where there's lots of trees. In fact, I've found snowy owl pellets before and looked through them.
How did you know the pellets were from snowy owls?
Because people saw the snowy owls coughing up the pellets, or we went to places where we knew snowy owls were hanging out a lot. And so we went and we found the pellets and we dug through them. And one of the really cool things that we found was some feathers that we were able to identify as a particular kind of duck. Because the snowy owls, when they're here, I mentioned they like to be along the lakefront, and one of the things they hunt is ducks that spend the winter on Lake Michigan. And we were able to identify some of the feathers of ducks that spend the winter on Lake Michigan that the owls had been eating. And snowy owls will even spend the winter floating around on ice floes in the lake, and they'll use that as the base to hunt ducks at night. And ducks are active during the daytime, so at night they're vulnerable to predation to snowy owls.
Ducks are kind of big.
Snowy owls are big.
How big are snowy owls?
Snowy owls are the heaviest owl in North America, and they weigh probably on average between 4 and 5 pounds, which for a bird is very heavy. And the smallest owl in North America is an elf owl, which is tiny, tiny, about the size of a sparrow, and that weighs about 1.5 ounces. The kids can do the math and figure out how many elf owls can fit in one snowy owl. That's about a tenth of a pound. So I've opened up 2 pellets now, and I've found teeth in both of them. So why don't we go over to our bone identification chart and see what we can find. So I've got these really nice upper jaws of a rodent. And I know it's a rodent because it has these big incisor teeth, and I can use the magnifying glass and look more closely at the teeth, sort of. So I can actually, it's easier to see without that. And what I can see is that these teeth are angled. And if you look at the bone identification chart, you'll see 3 types of cheek teeth or molar teeth: lobed, angled, and pointed, and these are angled. And if you go down and you look at the chart, there's only one type of rodent that has angled teeth, and that's a vole. So whatever owl this was, it was hunting voles at night. And voles, I know, are a very common rodent, and they are very often prey of owls. So this owl ate at least 2 voles before it coughed up that pellet. This owl, let's see here, I've got another upper jaw. This one is just a partial skull. I'm still sure it's a rodent based on the size and shape, but it's missing its incisors. And a lot of times the skull, especially the skull, because that's bigger than the other bones and a little bit more fragile, will break apart while the owl is eating it or in the gizzard. So when the owl coughs up the pellet and you open it up, you'll find broken pieces of the skull. But I can still see the teeth here, the molars or the cheek teeth, and I can see that they are lobed. And if you look at your chart, you'll see that there's only 2 types of rodents that have lobed teeth: rats and mice. Most likely this is a mouse, because rats are much bigger. Although baby rats can be tiny, but this is from a mouse. And it could be from a wild mouse, like a deer mouse or a white-footed mouse, which is another very common prey item for owls in the United States.
If owls don't chew their food, can they taste?
Some birds have very keen senses of smell. Most birds have poor senses of smell. Owls seem to have a poor sense of smell, but at the same time, they seem to show some preference for what they eat. So they probably have just enough sense of smell to assist them in tasting. Most of the times in the wild, they're just catching whatever they can. Owls tend to be opportunistic, so they eat whatever they can catch that's the right size. Fish, some owls eat fish. The owls around here probably don't, or at least do only very rarely. But there are some fish, especially in Africa and in Asia, that specialize on eating fish and eat only fish and other animals that live in the water. Owls will eat snakes, they'll eat birds, they'll eat mammals of all sizes, they'll eat frogs, they'll eat crustaceans like crayfish. So owls will, there's some owls that will eat almost any kind of prey somewhere in the world. And owls are amazingly adaptable. They live on every continent except Antarctica. They live in every habitat. There's almost nowhere in the world that doesn't have owls, at least for part of the year. So around the Chicago area and Evanston, our owls eat a lot of mice and voles, but they'll also catch birds. Some of the bigger owls, like great horned owl or snowy owls, will catch rabbits, ducks, even skunks and opossums. But mostly the owls around here are eating voles and mice, because those are the really common nocturnal rodents. And they don't eat too many birds because birds are active during the day, and they're pretty capable of hiding at night away from where owls would be. But owls will catch birds when they can. And sometimes if it's in the evening and the birds aren't asleep yet when the owls come out to hunt, that's when they're particularly vulnerable to being hunted by owls.
Is it harder for birds to hide from owls in the winter, since there's no leaves on the trees?
Probably. Yeah, but they're still very good at hiding. Most people have never seen a bird sleeping, and even me, who's always noticing birds and looking for birds, I never see birds sleeping. They know how to hide themselves, because at night when they're sleeping, they're pretty much defenseless, so that's when they're most vulnerable.
Can you tell me about the owls in Evanston?
Yeah, so 8 different species of owls have been seen in Evanston at one time or another, including snowy owls, which come here for the winter sometimes. But the two owls that we have most commonly and that we have year-round are great horned owl, which is a big one, it's the size of a big hawk, and eastern screech owl, which is a very small one, only about the size of a robin. They like areas with a lot of big trees, and sometimes if you're really lucky, you'll hear them at night. Great horned owls are the classic hooting owl. So every kid, you all know what an owl sounds like. They hoot. And if you ever hear an owl hooting around Evanston, that's going to be a great horned owl. And they're most vocal during the winter time. So great horned owls actually, most of their breeding is done in the winter, unlike almost every other bird. So in the winter is where you hear them the most. Eastern screech owls you have to find in much more wooded habitats. So in Evanston, that would be a place like Perkins Woods or the forest along the canal. Those are places where eastern screech owls live, and they do not hoot. They have a totally different sort of sound because it's really a haunting sound, and you will sometimes hear them at night around Evanston. Their voices carry extremely well, especially great horned owls. They make a very deep hooting sound that can carry very far. They're often high in the trees, which helps the sound carry as well, unlike screech owls, which are lower down and in the forest, so their voices don't carry as far. Great horned owls will even sit on rooftops sometimes, but typically they're high in the trees. The best way to find great horned owls during the day is to listen for crows. Crows hate owls. Crows and owls are enemies. And if you hear crows cawing and going really crazy, it might mean that they found an owl and they're trying to drive it away. So that's a good way to find owls, is to follow the angry mob of crows, and sometimes they'll lead you to a great horned owl.
Is that because owls will eat the crows?
Owls would eat the crows, yeah. Crows are big and they're very smart, but great horned owls are bigger, and great horned owls are very good hunters and will eat almost anything that they can catch. So if they have the chance to catch a crow, they would, especially at a nest. So the crows will try to drive them away. That's cool that one has voles and one has mice. All right, here's another pellet. I'm just going to break it open with my hands. I can already see there's lots of bones inside. I'm just going to gently pull it apart. I've opened up a lot of owl pellets over the years, and I've never found anything living inside. I always sort of think that there should be some little insect that specializes on eating owl pellets, but I've never found that. So here's a jawbone. Here's another jawbone. I probably have two favorite owls. One is snowy owl. It's just amazing. Every time I see a snowy owl, I'm just totally amazed, because this is a bird that I think of as being one of the most wild, living in one of the most wild places on earth, the tundra. And to have that bird visit us in Evanston or in Chicago is just sort of awe-inspiring. And the other one that I really like is the screech owl, which is one of the little owls that we have around here. And I sometimes get them in my backyard, and I just love when I'm awake at night in the summer and the windows are open, and all of a sudden I hear the screech owl calling outside. Seeing screech owls is a whole nother matter. They're very small, and they only come out at night, and they can be very hard to see, but I just love hearing them even when I don't see them. I'm just going to use the forceps to get rid of some of this fur, because I can see I've got another skull, another mammal skull here. So I found some nice examples of other bones here besides the skulls.
What's the strangest thing you ever found in an owl pellet?
Well, it's always surprising to me when I've found bird parts, because it just seems like it would be so hard for an owl to hunt a bird. But, you know, when I've opened snowy owl pellets and found duck feathers, I think that was probably the most surprising thing that I've ever found. It's also neat, so if you look on your bone identification chart, you'll see shrew on there. And shrews, unlike what we're finding here, the teeth with the orange incisors and these thick molar teeth, shrews have very sharp teeth for eating live prey, for eating insects and bugs and whatever else they can catch. Very sharp teeth. And so I found a couple of shrew skulls in the owl pellets that I've dissected as well. So here we've got another skull. So here's one more. When you start breaking open and pulling apart these pellets, because the skulls are bigger than all the other bones, you'll often, when you find a big chunk of fur like I just did, you'll find that there's a skull inside. And you'll see the tools that I'm using the most are my fingers and the forceps. Those are the ones that I find most useful. I'm also using the brush a bit. But any tools that you find around the house that might be useful, you can use. There's nothing that says that you can't use certain tools or have to use certain tools. Whatever you find handy. So here's some more real nice examples of jaw bones that we can see. I'm going to compare it to the other ones that we found. The one in my right hand is the angled teeth of a vole. I believe this one in my left hand is the lobe teeth of a mouse. It's not always so easy to tell. Here's the lobe teeth that I found earlier. The one on the left is quite a bit smaller, but I do think it is lobed, so that's probably another mouse. We also have this bone here that has a big hole in it, and we can look at that compared to the bone chart. Also, this is a pelvis bone. If I compare it to the chart, it's probably a mouse pelvis, which would match up with those teeth, which I thought were lobed. So it was probably a mice that this owl was eating. So now we've opened 3 owl pellets, and we found at least 6 rodents, 4 mice, and 2 voles. And I've studied owl pellets from wild owls, and that's typically what we find around here. A lot of mice and a lot of voles. Prey hole. You can imagine if you were an owl and you caught a mouse or a vole, which is very, very small, the bodies are only a couple inches long, that it would be a lot of work to pick the muscle off these tiny, tiny bones. So for them, it's much easier to swallow it whole and then regurgitate all the undigested bones and fur than trying to pick off all the little muscles. So this is a very efficient, even though it seems like it might be not efficient, this is the efficient way that owls have evolved to eat and to deal with the undigestible materials. And actually a lot of other birds also will regurgitate pellets. Because, for example, some birds that eat insects can't digest the exoskeleton, the hard part on the outside of an insect. and they'll regurgitate those as pellets as well. But with owls, because the pellets are big and because they leave them habitually in the same place underneath where they sleep every night, it's much easier to find owl pellets and collect owl pellets than for any other bird. So that's why you often find scientists studying owl pellets or school classes studying owl pellets, because owl pellets are pretty easy to find. And also what you find inside them, the bones that you find inside, are pretty identifiable, like how we just did it.
Okay, this is super important. What's the cutest type of baby owl?
Baby owls, because they are so fuzzy when they're first born, when they first hatch, they are really cute. All baby owls are really cute. In my opinion, the cutest of all of them are screech owls. They're very small, but their feet seem much too big for their bodies. Their eyes seem much too big for their bodies. But the birds themselves are very tiny and fuzzy and adorable. Baby owls have their own special name. They're called owlets. When they first hatch and come out of the eggs, they're basically helpless. They're blind, they only have very small feathers, and they are totally dependent on the parents to keep them fed and to keep them warm. Typically, the male owl, the father, does most of the hunting, and the female owl stays back at the nest to keep the young safe and warm. When the male brings food back to the nest, the female rips it up into little pieces, bite-sized pieces for the young birds. It's not until the young birds in the nest are a few weeks old that they can swallow prey whole like the adults do. That's when they start casting pellets themselves, when they start eating mice or birds or whatever the food is whole. That's when they start ingesting and eating the parts that they cannot digest, the things like the bones and the fur that you find in pellets. And that's when they start casting the pellets.
What's the best way to see owls in Evanston?
Seeing owls in Evanston, you have to be very lucky, but it is possible. Go for walks in the evening and listen for them. Of course, when they're out, it's dark, so that makes them hard to see, but you can bring a flashlight and maybe look for them that way. There are owls that nest in Evanston, and sometimes word will get around where the great horned owls have nested, and you can go over there and see the great horned owls. But it's not an easy thing to do to see owls in Evanston, but it's not impossible either.
How are the owls in Evanston doing?
Yeah, so our owls in Evanston are doing pretty well. We have great horned owls that have moved in, I think, in the last couple of decades. They weren't here before that, but they like our big trees. They like all of our rabbits and all of our squirrels that we have in our yards to eat. But it's great to be able to study owl pellets around here so that we can learn more about them, because the more that we know about the birds around us, the better we can understand them and the better we can make sure that they continue to do well into the future so that we have owls around here forever. And that's really what we want, is for the owl populations to be healthy and thriving so that you can go out and see owls and everyone you know can go out and see owls, so that we have a lot of owls and other birds around, because owls are part of our ecosystem. So they're part of the food web, they eat prey, and it's all part of the cycle of life that keeps the world going around us.
Thank you so much for joining us, Josh. Will you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
My name is Josh Engel. I own a company called Red Hill Birding. People hire me to take them bird watching all over the world. So I'm very lucky that I get to travel and look at birds and all sorts of wildlife for my job. And I used to work at the Field Museum, which some of you will be familiar with. And when I worked at the Field Museum, I actually got to sometimes dissect owl pellets as part of my job for some of the research that I was doing, studying owls in the Chicago area. When I did owl pellet research, what would happen is somebody would find owl pellets in the wild, and we would collect them, bring them back to the museum, and dissect them just like we're doing in this activity. And we would study what the owls were eating. We'd analyze the contents of the pellets to see how many mice they were eating, how many rats, how many voles, how many birds, whatever else we found. And then we would actually write that up and publish it in scientific journals so that other people could understand what the owls here were eating. And we could compare it to what owls were eating in different places at different times. So it's now some of our owl pellet studies are part of science.
Looks like this owl was very hungry. Thank you so much for helping me learn about my mysterious object, Josh.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Wow, owls are such fascinating creatures. What did you find in your owl pellet? We hope you found some cool stuff. Did opening your owl pellet make you even more curious about owls? In your kit, you have another paper like this. You can use the links on the page to learn more. Dissect an owl pellet on the computer. Check out these amazing live bird cams. Ooh, watch this incredible owlet rescue in Spain and more. And be sure to fill out our survey about this mystery science kit so we can improve our work. You can even win a little prize if you fill it out.
What should I do with the owl pellets when I'm done?
You can take it all outside if you have a yard or a garden, and you can leave it out there, which is where it would be naturally if the owl coughed it up in those places. There's nothing in here there's nothing living in here. There's nothing that will harm you or your pets or anything that's out in the garden or your yard.